How's it going, everyone? Today we're here to discuss the MLB trade deadline as well as just some of the other trades that happened during the month of July. July in review for the MLB. This is only going to be a trade discussion, though. In future installments, if I decide to continue this podcast type series, I'll be discussing other things that do happen throughout the MLB, especially during the playoffs. It'll be interesting to see how I would do that. But for now, we're just going to discuss the trade deadline in this episode. We're going to actually go first back to the beginning of July. We're going to go through a lot of the major trades. Not every single trade, because I don't have really a lot to say about, like, Tony Campana got traded, like something like that. Jeff Francis. I don't really want to spend too much time on that, especially since the first time I went through every trade that happened in July, the first time I tried to record this, and it took over 35 minutes. So, Jeff Samardzija and Jason Hamill were traded to the Athletics for Dan Straley, Addison Russell, and Billy McKinney. Now, I think that this was a great trade for both sides, dependent on if the A's win the World Series. If not, and especially the way Jason Hamill's been performing, I think that the Cubs might have won this trade, actually, getting Addison Russell and Billy McKinney and Dan Straley, who's, I believe, on league average this year. But that's good because the Cubs have, like, Edwin Jackson in their rotation and other people who are not that great to begin with, so this will definitely improve their rotation. I don't think he's pitching in the MLB right now, but Addison Russell is definitely he's going to be a star, and Billy McKinney could be a serviceable outfielder. Cubs don't have that many outfield prospects compared to the infield prospects, so that's a good thing that they got him. Jason Hamill sucked for the Athletics. I wouldn't be surprised if he got removed from the rotation with the recent John Lester acquisition. I haven't read who's getting replaced. I think it'd be Jason Hamill, though. He's like 0-3 or 4 with a 9 ERA. You know what? I think the Cubs won that trade if Addison Russell pans out. And I think that it was a good trade for both sides if the A's win the World Series. A few days later, the Diamondbacks started selling off some of their pieces. They got rid of Brandon McCarthy for Vidal Nuno. Nuno was having an okay year if he wasn't at Yankee Stadium. He's a fly ball pitcher, which doesn't work at that ballpark because of it's an AL ballpark, so it's got really not big dimensions. Arizona Chase Field is gigantic, so there's going to be a lot more space for fielders to run down fly balls and stuff. And Brandon McCarthy was on an expiring deal anyway, and it was really kind of a salary dump to the Yankees. Even though Brandon McCarthy has performed very well for the Yankees, I give the Yankees the win on this one because they didn't have to give up more than Vidal Nuno. A few days later, Houston Street was traded to the Padres along with Trevor Gott for a good amount of prospects. R.J. Alvarez, Taylor Linsley, and Jose Rondon. This is one of the few trades where I was thinking the Padres totally won it because all they gave up was a closer. But I think the Angels will make the World Series this year. So I am thinking that the Angels won this trade because Houston Street's one of the best relievers over the last few years. Especially, he's having an excellent year this year with the Padres. I think the Padres got more than they probably initially expected out of Houston Street. So I think it's a good trade for both sides. Then the Padres traded Chase Headley and some money to cover some of Chase Headley's contract to the Yankees for Yangervis Solarte and Rafael DePaula. I don't know anything about DePaula, so I'm not going to pretend like I do. So basically, I'm going to treat this like a Chase Headley for Yangervis Solarte trade straight up. Solarte was a rookie, and he was having a rookie slump. He was like 2 for 46 or 2 for 47. Now that is terrible. That deserves like a reassignment for a brief period of time. But I think that every rookie is going to go through a slump like that. Look at Xander Bogaerts. He's supposed to be the next best infielder in the MLB, and he's only hitting like 230 right now. He's hitting like 280 most of the season. So, rookie slumps are going to happen regardless of like the prestige of the prospect. For instance, like obviously Xander Bogaerts was on a higher level than Yangervis Solarte, but they're both rookies, so they were both going to have rough goings for a while, and I think that the Padres got more out of Chase Headley, especially considering the fact that Cashman kind of said he wasn't going to re-sign him. He was like, Headley's a nice rental player or something like that. Tigers dealt Joakim Soria to the Rangers for Jake Thompson and Corey Knebel. I would have initially said this was a fair trade. Oh, but I had the Padres winning that last trade. I would have initially said that Soria for Thompson Knebel was a fair trade for both sides, but considering the fact that Soria has been terrible for the Tigers, I'm going to give this trade to the Rangers. They got a good starter. They got a couple good pitching prospects. I think one of them, I think Knebel's slotted as like a reliever in the long term, but that's two, I think, top 10 picks. They picked both of them in the top 10, I believe. So I think that the Rangers definitely won that trade. Especially, it was a good salary dump for them, too, with Soria. The Mariners traded Stephen Pryor to get Kendrys Morales back after they didn't re-sign him in the offseason. I think it was inevitable that he was not going to sign with the Twins long-term, Kendrys Morales. So to get something out of him at the trade deadline was smart. Well, it wasn't quite the trade deadline. It was a couple days ago. It was like a week ago now, because it's August 1st and I'm recording this. But Kendrys Morales was the top Mariner in RBI last year, and I believe he also led the team in home runs, and he was up there in average. So it was good to get him back, even though he's been kind of bad recently. I think the Mariners won that trade because they only had to give up Stephen Pryor. Giants traded Heath Hembree and Edwin Escobar to the Red Sox for Jake Peavy. I initially started to think that it was a little bit too much to give up for Jake Peavy. However, the more I think about it, it's kind of a fair trade for both sides, because Jake Peavy is returning to the NL, where he was obviously a lot better than he ever was in the American League with the Chicago White Sox and Boston Red Sox. He's a lot better with the Padres. He's great against the Dodgers, who the Giants are trying to dethrone in the division, although I don't think it's going to happen. And especially considering that Matt Cain went down, and they have pretty comparable stats, I think it was a good trade for both sides. I don't think there's a clear winner yet. And I think the only way it'll be seen is, the it factor is if Edwin Escobar turns out to be a good starter. Then I think it will be the Red Sox who won that, because Heath Hembree will definitely be a good reliever. He's pitched like 7 innings in the MLB. They've all been shutout innings. So I think they definitely won that trade. I'm going to talk about the Danny Valencia trade. I'm going to talk about a few of the minor trades that are coming up here, because this is as we got closer to the trade deadline. My favorite team is the Toronto Blue Jays. They traded Eric Kratz and Liam Hendricks for Danny Valencia. That's basically giving up nothing for something that could be useful to them, because Juan Francisco's batting average against left-handers is like .8 or something like that the last time I was watching. .08, excuse me. .080. I don't know about now, and I don't have time to look it up. But Danny Valencia's always been known to be a good hitter versus lefties, but not righties. So it's looking like it's going to be a third base platoon for the time being. I think that makes them a little bit better. That was at least something they did at the deadline. Dodgers traded for Darwin Barney to the Cubs, a player to be named later. That's another trade where you're going to have to see who the player to be named later was. I think them getting anything out of Darwin Barney was good, though, because they waited a year too long to trade him. They should have traded him last year when his stock was higher. But with Arizmendi Alcantara, obviously he's not having a great start, but I think he's going to be obviously the future at second base for the Cubs. I don't know how obvious it is, but I think he's going to pan out long term for them. Moving on, the Cubs acquired Felix Doubront, another from the Red Sox for a player to be named later. Another situation of I had the Cubs winning that trade just because they got rid of Darwin Barney, and the trade before that I had the Blue Jays winning because they gave up nothing for something useful to them. The Cubs got Felix Doubront from the Red Sox for a player to be named later. Again, we need to see who the player to be named later is going to be. But I think it was a good deal for Felix Doubront. He had a really good stretch last year. He's got good stuff. He just doesn't put it together very well from what I've heard. He was he was one of their better pitchers last year when Buck Holtz was out, when they made the World Series run. But it was obvious he needed to go somewhere else at this point. He wasn't having a great season, getting frustrated, things I've read. Later that day, the Cardinals traded outfielder James Ramsey, one of their at least 12 outfield prospects that are projected to be useful, for Justin Masterson, who was having a bad year and probably was not going to re-sign with the Cleveland Indians. I believe he's in the last year of his deal, and turned down several extension offers in the offseason. So I think it was a good trade for them. Even though Masterson was loved in the clubhouse, it was probably inevitable that he was on his way out. And the Indians got James Ramsey, who could be ready for the MLB soon. Who knows? He's a good defender. in the outfield, which is good because I remember the last time I saw an Indians game, their outfield was like Ryan Rayburn, Mike Aviles, and Nick Swisher. In the game I was watching, I know it's probably not their normal outfield, but that's terrible defensive outfield. They're so slow and so bad defensively at any position you really put them at. So I think James Ramsey's a good acquisition for them. They probably could have got a little bit more out of Masterson if they traded him in the offseason, but it was better to get something out of him than nothing. Alright, here's the robbery trade, as I like to call it, where the Astros got Jake Marisnick and Colin Moran, as well as Francis Martes in a draft pick for Jared Kozar, Austin Waits, and Enrique Hernandez. Obviously, I wonder what the Marlins were thinking doing this trade for. If it was giving up Jake Marisnick and Colin Moran for someone who was young, like a Jake Arrieta or something, where not Jared Kozar. Jared Kozar had a good last year, a decent last year. I believe he had an ERA of 2.8 or something. I might be completely wrong. He's had a bad year this year. He walks almost as much as he strikes out people. I don't think that he was worth Marisnick or Moran separately. I think that they should have done it for Marisnick or Moran, not both. That's two of their top 5 prospects in their system. I don't think this trade was worth it for the Marlins. I think the Astros made out great on this trade. And I had the Cardinals winning the Masterson trade, too. And the Cubs winning the Dubront trade. I haven't been saying that. Cubs traded Emilio Bonifacio and James Russell for Victor Caratini. The Braves have a lot of catching prospects in their system. So, well, they also have a lot of catchers just in general. Like, they have Evan Gattis, Ryan Dolmet, Christian Bettencourt, Gerald Laird. They're all serviceable. So, I think it was okay that they gave up a catcher. James Russell is having a decent year out of the bullpen, and Emilio Bonifacio obviously started out hot, but he hasn't been so hot since. He's been okay. But he's really just going to be for the Braves bench, which is one of the worst in the NL. They have the lowest amount of RBI in pinch hit situations, and they're 19 for 119. So the Yankees made a duo of moves. First, they traded Stephen Drew for Kelly Johnson. This is likely just a salary dump for the Red Sox, but it's also a decent trade. They pretty much just replaced a shortstop with a utility man. Yankees later acquired Martin Prado for Peter O'Brien. I didn't have a winner for that trade. I feel like they both made out good on the first Yankee-Red Sox trade. The Yankees traded for Martin Prado. They traded Peter O'Brien. The thing that makes me not like this trade for both, I don't like this trade for either side. One, Peter O'Brien's 24 already, and he's in, I believe, only high A, or he's either in high A or double A. But that's, he's 24 already, and he hasn't even cracked triple. He's probably not going to make the MLB as anything useful. Martin Prado is also owed $10 million each in the next 2 years, so if they use him as a utility man, that's twice as much as I'd pay a utility man to just be a utility man. So I think that, I don't know, it depends on how they use Martin Prado. If they use Martin Prado every day, I consider this a win for the Yankees. If they don't, I consider this a win for the D-backs. Or actually, I don't consider this a win for the D-backs. I think they made out terrible either way. But it's just them getting rid of a veteran piece that they didn't need. Next trade was Andrew Miller for Eduardo Rodriguez. Again, I think that was the Orioles thinking, we can contend. So they gave up a higher end prospect for a reliever, which isn't, it's okay. But I don't know how big of a chance they have to win the World Series in the AL with the Tigers and the Angels and the Athletics, and whoever the other wild card team is probably going to be really good too. I would give them the least amount of chance out of any of the 5 teams I have making the playoffs at this point in the season. I give them the least chance. So, this doesn't look like it's a great trade for them, but who knows? You have to see the trade in action. Now, this is an interesting trade. I have the Red Sox winning that trade, too. I have the next is the Nationals. They traded Zach Walters for Asdrubal Cabrera. Now, when Zimmerman went down with his his hamstring, there was a big talk about who's going to replace him who's going to replace the extra spot at the infield, because they have Rendon at third base now. Danny Espinosa sucks, so Asdrubal's probably going to play second base for them. Zach Walters was the other guy they talked about playing second base for them, but he's not great defensively. But he's just going to fill in Asdrubal's spot in Indiana. In Cleveland, probably. That or Mike Aviles. And I don't know what they would do with Zach Walters at that point. But that was I'd give that trade to the Indians. Nationals, definitely. They gave up someone who's probably better offensively for someone who's good defensively and offensively. He's a good two-way player as Drupal, and he's not going to re-sign in Washington probably, I don't think anyway. Mariners traded Abraham Almonte for Chris Denorfia as well as some catching prospect whose name I can't pronounce. Like, the Padres are the king of, like, really bad... Like, the Padres are like the kings of having people whose names you can't pronounce. If you think about it, it's true. Anyway, Chris Denorfia for Abraham Almonte, basically. Abraham Almonte had less than... I believe he had just over 100 at-bats and struck out over 60 times this year and batted below 200. I think this is definitely a win for the Mariners, but it was also great on the Padres' part to get at least something useful out of Chris Denorfia, who was probably not worth that much. I'm surprised they got anything out of him, to be honest. But the Mariners kind of solved a little bit of their outfield problem. More so, they solved it later on. So, the Brewers traded Mitch Haniger and Anthony Banda for Gerardo Parra. Another trade that the Diamondbacks kind of just got rid of. They have a surplus of outfielders, from what I understand, especially now that David Peralta has emerged as a good hitter for them in the outfield. Their infield is really the problem, and their pitching is a huge problem for them, too. That's why they're not contending this year. Gerardo Parra is really expendable, even though he's an excellent fielder. If you can't hit, you're not going to survive in the MLB. Look at Reed Brignac. Even though Reed Brignac is back in the MLB. Next trade was I'm going to do this trade first, and then I'll do the other Athletics trade, even though this one's more notable. Alan Craig and Joe Kelly headed to Boston for John Lackey, Corey Littrell, and money. I think this is an excellent trade for both sides. I don't really see a winner here. Obviously, you say Alan Craig, he was their best hitter last year. Terrible year this year. He's playing the same position as their top prospect, Oscar Taveras, who's ready for the MLB. And he hasn't quite performed up to standards, but he also hasn't been given a lot of chance. He's only had like 100 at-bats this year, and he's playing full-time now, I'm pretty sure. I think that what the Red Sox kind of did was buy low on two bounce-back candidates, even though they had to give up Lackey. Lackey was definitely not going to play for the money that he was going to have to next year, as he's only going to make $500,000 due to having Tommy John surgery during the duration of this contract he's currently on. This freaking podcast is still going to go long anyway. So I think John Lackey, it was good to get rid of that before it became a problem. Also, I think from what I've heard, he's been frustrated with the struggles of the team this year. Joe Kelly had a good year last year. Alan Craig had an excellent season last year, especially his first half. He was definitely the first half MVP last year. And I think a position change kind of has a lot to do with why he wasn't as good. His slugging does go down every year, which is a cause for concern, but I think he'll be a bounce-back candidate next year, especially playing in Boston. A lot of hitters do improve when they go to Boston. Now, this trade actually happened after the other major trade that the Athletics made, but I'm going to go over it first. They traded Tommy Malone to the Twins for Sam Fuld, who they waived earlier in the year, and then gave to the Twins on waivers. I think that was a stupid trade. I think they gave up a little bit too much for Sam Fuld, although Sam Fuld's probably going to platoon with someone in the outfield for a starting spot anyway. That happened after the next trade, but I don't know how much I have to say about the next trade, so I wanted to do these two major trades at the deadline. John Lester, Johnny Gomes, and cash to the Oakland Athletics for Yoenis Cespedes and a draft pick. I thought this was a great trade for both sides if the A's win the World Series. If not, this is a bad trade for the A's. They got 2 months of John Lester and an outfielder who only really hits lefties well, although he was a former Athletic, so, I mean, who knows. But I think Yoenis Cespedes is due to see a decrease in home runs, but an increase in average playing in Boston. He's a right-handed hitter. He's a pull hitter. He's going to hit a lot of doubles off the Green Monster, I think. I saw Moonlight Swami, who's another bigger name YouTuber, did a video about the elevation angles in Fenway, and it was like the elevation angle to hit a home run over the Green Monster's 38, and like less than half of Yoenis Cespedes' home runs are even at 30 degrees, so it's going to be interesting to see how that works out. But I think that they have that trade and the Allen Craig trade tells me is Boston's looking to contend next year. Call me crazy, but I think that's what they're going to do. I think it's what they're trying to do anyway. Alright, actually, I didn't have a lot to say about the trade. I do have a lot to say about this trade, though, because this is the trade that's kind of not only confusing a lot of people, but is one that has a lot of conflicting opinions, and I don't really have... I haven't really sided with anyone on this. But David Price is in Detroit. Austin Jackson is in Seattle. And Drew Smyly, Nick Franklin, and Willie Adams are in Tampa Bay's organizations now. I think the way you can justify this is that, actually, I think the Rays made out decently in that, because they did wait a little bit too long to trade David Price. I think a lot of the rumors we saw about David Price were bullcrap. I definitely don't think that St. Louis was ready to give up, who was it supposed to be? It was supposed to be Shelby Miller and Oscar Taveras. There's no way they were going to give up both of those guys for David Price. I don't believe, anyway. I think that this wasn't probably the best offer they got, but it was the one that made the most sense, because they got another lefty to replace him. They got an infield prospect for Zobrist, who's probably going to be dealt next year. I don't imagine them keeping Zobrist after next year unless he takes a significant pay cut. So I think that that's them getting ready for that inevitable move. And you know Escobar is only under contract for 2 more years, even though he did just sign an extension. You never know with Tampa Bay what they're going to do and when. Austin Jackson goes to the Mariners. I think, actually, I'd say the Mariners won this trade because they gave up Nick Franklin, who's blocked by Robinson Cano at the Major League level anyway. They gave up nothing, basically, for Austin Jackson, who's been one of the better hitting outfielders over the last few years. Since he's come into the league, he has like a career 280 average, which is pretty good compared to the production they got out of center field this year. Even though I thought James Jones was decent, he doesn't walk enough. So I think they definitely won that trade. However, I don't want to say that Detroit lost the trade, but I think they made out the worst out of the 3 teams, because they lost Austin Jackson and Drew Smyly, and their top, from what I've heard, top shortstop prospect. Some people have said he's very highly regarded. And they got David Price, obviously. They have the last 3 Cy Young winners in their rotation. But I don't think they made out the best. I think Tampa Bay actually made out better than Tigers in this trade, even though they could have made out a lot better with the David Price trade, obviously, if any of the rumors were true. Anyway, that wraps up MLB trade deadline talk. I'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching.